really nice to see all you guys. I see a lot of familiar faces and new people. It's nice to see you. James Ford was born in 1948 in Oakland. He traveled around quite a bit with his family, but always kind of coming back to California. He's lucky that way. He was a high school dropout. He acknowledges that his first education came through 20 years of working in used and antiquarian bookstores up and down the coast of California. Eventually, he returned to school, earned a BA in psychology at Sonoma State, an MDiv and an MA in philosophy of religion at the Pacific School of Religion in Berkeley. At 18, he began studying Zen with Mel Sojourn Weitzman, who was leader and later abbot of the Berkeley Zen Center. He then studied with Roshi Jiyu Kennett, completed Shusho training with her in 1970, received Dharma transmission from her in 71. He then continued on a variety of spiritual paths, doing some of a lot of things in the search for wisdom.
That was 3 paragraphs in the bio.
He did a lot of other stuff. He journeyed the way we all do. In 1991, James was ordained a Unitarian Universalist minister. He served congregations in Wisconsin and Arizona, and he currently serves as senior minister of the First Unitarian Church of Providence in Providence, Rhode Island. In 1985, I'm following their biography.
Yeah.
In 1985, going backwards, he became a student of the Harada Yasutani Zen teacher, Dr. John Tarrant Roshi, the first Dharma successor of Robert Aitken Roshi. He was authorized to teach by Tarrant Roshi in 1998. Received Inka Shomei in 2005, which acknowledged him as a Dharma heir in the Harada Yasutani Zen lineage. James is currently guiding teacher of Boundless Way Zen, which is a network of sanghas throughout New England, a sitting group that joined with another sitting group, and now there are a whole network of sitting groups around here. He's the author of several books, including the latest, If You're Lucky, Your Heart Will Break, Field Notes from a Zen Life, published by Wisdom in 2012. His blog is called Monkey Mind. Please join me in welcoming him.
So when I was first contacted, I was asked, well, what would you like to talk about? Now, I don't know. How about the arts of liberal ministry? It seemed sufficiently ambivalent that we could cover a lot of territory. As I started coming in towards deadline here and trying to figure out, well, what might actually be of interest to folk, I thought there was maybe a little arc of things. Just to start with, I believe there is some very interesting aspects to the meeting of Unitarianism and later Unitarian Universalism and Buddhism, particularly Japanese Buddhism. And it has some significant theological consequences that I think are of interest to anybody traveling a path that has an interest in Buddhism in the West. And are there any Unitarian Universalists here? Cool. And Unitarian Universalists. I thought I would give that part of the presentation actually, you can stop me anywhere along the line and say, James, that seems to be factually inaccurate or whatever, and we can play. And then, but I'll finish this part, and then possibly there's some exploration we might want to do. Then move into how a very brief presentation on how I see this has meant in my life. What would the meeting of Buddhism and Western rational religion mean in a particular human life? Fine. Then hopefully that might generate a little bit more conversation, and out of that, sure, let's talk about ministry and let that be. What would you like to talk about? Parish ministry, chaplaincy, community ministry, whatever it is that might be sparked out of our visit. Is that a reasonable plan? Are people Does anybody want to go somewhere else really, really strong? Cool, cool. Okay. Then in 1844, a chapter from the Saddharma Pundarika Sutra, the seminal Mahayana Buddhist text, the Lotus Sutra, was published in the Boston Transcendentalist journal, The Dial. Best I can tell, this chapter, published as the Preaching of the Buddha, or rather Preaching of Buddha, was the first Buddhist text to be rendered into the English language. I did quite a little bit about it's based upon Burnoff's French translation, actually in an early text that was published in that same year. It's kind of interesting that they were able to pull it out that quickly. Footnote on a footnote, the Preaching of Buddha was for many years credited to Henry David Thoreau. It was reasonable enough of speculation as the chapter was published anonymously. He was editor of the journal at that time and was well known to be interested in matters Eastern. Of course, pretty much all the Transcendentalists were interested in those matters Eastern to one degree or another. But in fact, once again, Anonymous was a woman. The translator of Eugene Burnoff's French rendering of the Sanskrit was the astonishing public intellectual Elizabeth Palmer Peabody. At the time, she was the proprietor of Boston's West Street bookstore, one of the principal gathering places of Boston's Transcendentalist community. It wasn't the first Eastern text to follow into Unitarian hands, nor would it be the last. A great jumble of Eastern texts appeared in English in those early mid-decades of the 19th century. So much so, people had trouble sorting out what was what. Ralph Waldo Emerson's oft-cited high praise for the Bhagavad Gita as a wonderful expression of Buddhist wisdom was typical of that moment. In fact, Buddhism proved to be a rich field for projection. For instance, in The Progress of Religious Ideas Through Successive Ages, Unitarian writer Lydia Maria Child described the Buddha as a heavenly spirit. She went on blithely to count God, soul, and creation as Buddhist concepts. Today, all this would likely raise a smile in most who would run across it, and to a few might even be offensive. Of all the Transcendentalists, Henry Thoreau has been consistently described as the most Buddhist or Buddhist-like. While he read what was available, pretty much as soon as it was available, Thoreau more likely discovered from his own observation that Zen Buddhist perspective of the thing in itself. Ultimately, I think it more accurate to characterize his nature mysticism as more proto-Taoist than any flavor of Buddhist. Buddhism, while continuing to interest religious liberals, also continued to be misunderstood throughout the 19th century. Even by the end of the century, the Unitarian writer James Freeman Clarke, like Lydia Maria Child before him, searched for and found arguments for immortality of the soul and for God in the teachings of Buddha and Buddhism. Slowly, however, people began to find in Buddhism something more than a field of projection, where they were looking for a purified or corrected form of Christianity. Such doctrines as shunyata, emptiness, boundlessness, and Atman, or no soul, no abiding self, and karma, the play of causality, began to capture Western imaginations, enriching our Western spiritual dialogue. And something else happened as well. Profound influences began to flow in both directions, east to west, yes, but also west to east. For example, the Unitarian and Buddhist scholar Jeff Wilson outlines the remarkable story of Nakahama Manjiro, a boy who in 1841, along with several other Japanese fishermen, was caught in a storm and swept out to sea. They were rescued from near certain death by a New Bedford whaler. The crew was dropped off in Hawaii, except for young Nakahama, captivated by the boy's intelligence and curiosity about everything he encountered. the ship's captain, William Whitmer, took Nakahama into his personal care. They returned to Massachusetts, only to find Whitmer's Methodist Church informing the family that no niggers were allowed. So they joined Fairhaven's Unitarian congregation. And the boy, now known as John Mung, grew into adulthood a Unitarian. After an adventurous life well worth pursuing in greater detail, and there are some places where you can find them, including life as a whaler and later a successful gold prospector, he gathered enough wealth to allow him to return to Japan a mere decade after he and his companions had been swept out to sea. Once back in Japan, he endured the long-established test to prevent Christians from entering the country. A picture of the Virgin Mary was placed on the ground, and he was required to step on it. As a Unitarian, Manjiro did. He would rise to fame and further fortune in Japan, invited into the imperial court, and eventually was even raised to the rank of samurai. In 1868, with the revolt that established the Meiji emperor, many of Manjiro's courtier disciples were recruited into the reforming leadership. Wilson draws a pretty clear line from Manjiro's Unitarianism, not only to many of the era's social reforms, but also to many reforms within the Buddhist sects, particularly the Pure Land and Zen. Wilson states how these, quote, Unitarian-derived modernist principles helped Japanese Buddhists turn the tide of the anti-Buddhist movement infecting state Shinto-dominated Meiji. Then, as if returning the favor, the first Zen master to visit America as part of the 1893 World Parliament of Religions was the Rinzai abbot Soen Shaku. The Roshi had in his youth studied at Keio University. Wilson argues the Zen Buddhism taught at that university was deeply influenced by the progressive and largely Unitarian spirit of rational inquiry, together with a broad humanism. And this modified Japanese Zen in a way that making it recognizable and compelling to many Western spiritual seekers of a critical disposition. Two of the abbot's disciples, Daisetsu Tatario Suzuki and Nyogen Senzaki, would prove to be central to the introduction of Zen to the West. Senzaki influencing a generation of early spiritual seekers, mainly on the Western coast, and Suzuki most of all as a prolific writer and translator. And through Suzuki's disciple Alan Watts, a popularized version of a rationalist Zen became the Zen most English-speaking people would encounter. What's important to distinguish here is how religious dialogue moves from misunderstanding and projection to offering subtle coloring and expanded perspectives in each tradition. And sometimes whole new traditions emerge. All of this can be found within the feedback loop of the Spirit, a wonderful emerging from religious dialogue. And I suggest this particular feedback loop between Western liberal religion and many aspects of Buddhism has continued to this day. So rich in possibility. To continue to point to some of the variations in conversation, I think for Unitarian Universalism in the 20th century, one of the most important of the many dialogues occurring between Buddhism and Western religions and psychology was the meeting of Buddhism and Western humanism. At first, for many humanists, Buddhism appeared to be an intriguingly ancient faith that, like humanism, was not directly concerned with questions of God or gods, those grand cosmological speculations that many comparative religion theorists have posited as fundamental to any authentic religion, or did, until they began to understand what Buddhism actually taught. Buddhism's existence challenged the conventions of early comparative religion and comforted many religious liberals and radicals. Now, While humanists, like many before, misconstrued some of the teachings of Buddhism, and in recent years have had to deal with the unpleasant realization that there are deities and magic in Buddhism, as well as a resonant analysis of the human condition and rational approaches to the matter of the human heart. Nonetheless, Unitarian Universalist humanists have provided a strong start replicating the radical questioning at the heart of Zen Buddhist practice, for one. Buddhism offers Western humanists much more than confirmation of an authentic, non-theistic, or even atheistic spiritual perspective and a call for a radical self-reliance, as well as that powerful attraction to the thing in itself. I find humanism and Buddhism are complementary approaches to the great religious questions of life and death, not the only possible complements, but powerful ones. This has been deeply important in my own spiritual life. Of course, the ongoing interest in Buddhism among Unitarian Universalists has not been exclusive to humanists. Christian Unitarian Universalists have also been attracted to the practical mysticism of Buddhism. And a number have tried various Buddhist meditation disciplines. As an example, the UU Christian writer and minister Eric Wickstrom maintains a regular Zen meditation discipline. He is not the only one. In fact, Buddhist insights have been in conversation with all the emergent spiritualities of Unitarian Universalism, from paganism to Hinduism, each potentially rich. The Unitarian Universalist world has become a microcosm of world spiritual dialogue, and for me, more importantly, of potential spiritual synthesis. Some of it will come to nothing, probably most of it. Some will be silly, and some may open hearts to previously undreamed possibilities. I believe I see some of the contours of those possibilities. There's been ample precedent for this sort of thing. As Buddhism has entered other cultures, it has engaged the indigenous religions, often with powerful consequences. For instance, the encounter between Indian Buddhism and Chinese religion, particularly Taoism, produced Zen. And there is no doubt the conversations between humanists and Christians and Jews and Buddhism is a rich field. But at this point, it seems the most powerful of the many conversations going on is between Buddhism and Western psychology. The range of literature is vastly too wide to even begin to list here, but its importance would be difficult to underestimate. Among the mutual areas of interest are ecological, this is mutual areas of interest between Unitarian Universalists and Buddhists in the West, are ecological and concerns and economic justice. And I have found in my own observations how each of these spiritualities have informed and expanded the other in finding fruitful ways to engage what seems intractable problems. Also, the Western Buddhist convert community has paralleled the Unitarian Universalist community in many interesting and sometimes unpleasant ways, where both are much more white, highly educated, and middle class than either finds comfortable. Looking at the areas of hurt and disappointment can prove as rich as any other part in this ongoing exploration. The conversation continues. The dance expands. It is perhaps not surprising to see how many Unitarian Universalists today are deeply involved in Buddhist matters. UU such as former Meadville Lombard Dean Gene Reeves and Jeff Wilson at the University of Waterloo are making important contributions to the scholarly study of Buddhism. Gene Reeves, for those who don't know, has produced what is rapidly becoming the standard translation of the Lotus Sutra in English. Important work. And increasing numbers of Unitarian Universalists are becoming spiritual directors within Buddhist disciplines. UU minister Doug Kraft is one of a number of longtime Buddhist meditation teachers within the association. Birthright UU Tara Brock is one of the most prominent of the Vipassana meditation teachers in our country. Vipassana meditation teachers, UU minister Joel Baer is a senior student of the Western Tibetan teacher Surya Das and has been authorized by him to teach. UU minister Robert Shabley has been designated a Dharmacharya and associate teacher by Thich Nhat Hanh. David Reineck, Melissa Blacker, and I are the first 3 Unitarian Universalists to receive Dharma transmission, full authorization as Zen teachers. And we don't look to be the end of the line. One recent survey suggests that 10,000 Unitarian Universalists consider themselves Buddhist. And if one counts the number of those who consider Buddhism an influence, the number swells enormously. I don't touch on this here, but I would add, to the degree that that's a reliable number, and I'm moderately confident it is, it would make a subset of Unitarian Universalism the largest convert Buddhist group in North America. It can be argued Buddhism is one of 2 important spiritual currents informing Unitarian Universalism today, possibly as much as feminism, but at least approaching it. Buddhism challenges and may well reshape Western religious thought in general, and the Unitarian Universalist way in particular. So, where is this going? Not possible to say. Not yet. Not for a long time. What I can say is that I see something rich in possibility happening. Maybe even a facet in the jewel that is our emerging new universalism. As for me, at least, I find some sense of hope for our beautiful and hurt humanity, for our beautiful and hurt world. And in the moment, perhaps that's enough. So that's my historical footnotes. Any want to talk? Oh, come on. Surely somebody wants to challenge the factuality or the importance of this little part. Or maybe you have just a thought.
I was hoping you could say a little bit more about something you hinted at when you said that Buddhism offers more than already a confirmation of already held values for these and beyond.
All right. Well, I did see, what was it on? I like Facebook, which I guess is living proof that it's no longer that the young people must be fleeing it in droves. But there's one of these little memes that went in. It was a quote from attributed to Anais Nin, and it says, "We don't see people as they are; we see them as we are." So projection's really natural. I mean, we do that. We look for confirmation of our biases. We look for confirmation of our hopes for the world. Totally natural, totally human. And if we want to be something more, if we want to get out of the loops of our lives, we need to, break loose a little bit. And I find it fascinating watching how as a group, Unitarians, now Unitarian Universalists, kind of recapitulated what I think we do as human beings, just as individuals. We encounter something new, and our first attempt is to co-opt it, just to make it ours in some manner. And if we persist, usually we stop there. That's it. It's put into its box. We can put it on the shelf and not worry about it. But if we persist, we begin to discover uncomfortable truths. Oh, there are other ways of seeing the world. And in Unitarian Universalism, we began to, first, you look at concepts like karma. where it's been wrestled with. It birthed a whole, a particular understanding of it, birthed the whole aspect of theosophical thought, which is a fascinating minority religious movement in European and American thinking that was very important at the end of the 20th century, and then pervaded, sort of seeped into contemporary New Thought thinking, which is it's either the Mormons or the New Thought that's the great American religion. I'm not sure which is the more problematic for us, but so we can have these variations on the themes come up, and we work with them. But if we continue to persist, if we try to actually understand what is being presented in this other tradition, in this case Buddhism, we find all of a sudden our sense of reality begins to tremble a little bit. The foundations begin to get kicked a bit, and great things can come out of it. In my experience. So we see it in the Unitarian Universalists. We see that sort of thing for all of us probably in some degree or other from in the maturation of our spiritual lives. And I think I'm less competent in the area of Christian Buddhist dialogue, but I often get swept up in it. People don't quite get what Unitarian Universalist part of the conversation is, and so I sat with Christians a lot, and I'm beginning to see how beautifully and challengingly and sometimes weirdly this persistent dialogue is creating something new. And what I love about Jeff Wilson's work is it turns out it's not a one-way street. There's a whole the whole question of modernist Buddhism, and with lots to challenge, and it's got its real problems, and yet it's also an emergent reality in world Buddhism. It's not just something happening in California.
Has Thomas Merton's interest in Buddhism influenced Catholicism at all? How was that looked upon?
Well, there is an interest. I do know a little tiny bit about the Catholic and Zen encounter. Thomas Merton is kind of like the saint of it. He's one. Just this beautiful human being and an interesting thinker, and he certainly, in my generation, he was really important as part of the spiritual dialogue among those who were concerned with the war in Vietnam and other social inequities, and he's looms large in our hearts, perhaps. And but actually, his influence is only slight in that area. But there are other people who become more important. So, for instance, there's actually a German Jesuit named Hugo Inemaya Lassalle, who went as a Jesuit missionary to Japan. I no longer remember what decade, but like the second or third decade of the 20th century. So he's a little earlier, actually, than Thomas Merton. And he becomes enamored of Zen practice and completes formal koan study and is installed as a Zen teacher. And his retreat is actually dedicated by the Roman Catholic Bishop of Hiroshima. And there's this broad range of Zen and Catholic conversation and practice that's just utterly bizarre and absolutely delightful. One of my actually favorite human beings is Ruben Abito. I don't know if anybody's read any of Ruben's work. He's Filipino national. 18, he joins the Society of Jesus. Gets shipped off to the Japanese province where he's doing his doctoral research in comparative medieval Buddhism at Tokyo University. What else would a Jesuit do? And his spiritual director says, want to meet a Zen master? And 15 years later, he is one, and happily a Jesuit. And he was teaching at the University of Kyoto, which is a Jesuit institution, when he met Maria, who is a German national doing her doctoral research in the Lotus Sutra. And it is my opinion that if he had met Mark, they might have been able to cut a deal. But Maria was a bridge too far. And somehow he managed to navigate his way through, got formally laicized, but is still in good standing with the Roman Church. Landed a gig as professor of comparative religion at Perkins School of Theology at SMU in Dallas, where he runs the Maria Kanan Zen Center. And actually, we had a Unitarian convention, a General Assembly in Fort Worth, actually a couple in my time, but the first one, I had known him. He's my uncle in the Dharma in Zen lineages, and we'd been correspondents for years. And I was going to Fort Worth. I thought, the first time I get to actually physically meet him. And so I rent a car and I drive up to Dallas. And the first part that is confusing to me is he lives in a ranch-style house in a housing tract, in Dallas, and which somehow just didn't quite my picture of something, of several things actually. And I'm driving up, and the front door and all the windows are open. And this is late June, and it's hot and it's sticky. And I park and I go into the doorway and say, Reuben. He says, James. And I say, oh, Reuben, what's wrong? Is the air conditioning broken? And he says, the people don't have air conditioning. And he's Jesuit, they're all communists. Because I say, I'm sorry, I don't know what I was thinking. So where's Maria and the kids? And he says, oh, she won't stay here in the summer. They're all in Germany. And it reminded me of that. The first time I saw it was on the film about Gandhi, where he says it costs his friends a fortune to keep him in poverty. Just one of these wonderful, wonderful people. And there's a bunch of them. There's mostly Jesuits, Maryknolls, nuns. When I belonged to a Zen an organization of Zen teachers called the AZTA, American Zen Teachers Association, and there's some minimal requirements for, you got to be recognizable as a Zen teacher within by other Zen teachers. And Elaine McInnes decided she was going to join, which shocked everybody. She's a Canadian nun who, I don't know, she's got the Order of Canada. She's one of these great social justice people. I actually went to visit her once in her retirement up in Canada. And I said, okay, I got to ask you the question. I have heard this from 4 different sources. So you were in the southern part of the Philippines, where they have this perpetual civil war. And I was told that as the army advanced, you hid a wounded rebel in the church. And then a week later, the battle turned, and you hid a wounded soldier in the church. I said, "This true?" And she said, "Well, what was I supposed to do?" And so, then the poor schmo who was a rather distinguished Western Zen teacher is supposed to call her up and ask her about her credentials. And he said he had never been more scared in his life. One of the great Zen masters of Western culture, Roman Catholic nun. So there's this stuff going on. No real literature, in part because well, another example is there's a Benedictine prior in Germany, and Cardinal Ratzinger actually got instruction, sat a week in sesshin with him, and went back to his offices and filed the papers to silence him. So it's it's hard to get good information because most of them fly below the radar. But a fascinating subset of something, I'm not sure, is it a subset of Buddhism, a subset of Catholicism? It's really interesting, yeah.
Well, and I think we were intrigued in the fact that the punishment was silence.
Yeah. Well, there is something kind of delicious in that, isn't there? Yeah. He did leave the order. Yeah. Viligus Jager is his name, and he leads a retreat center in the Black Forest to this day. Yeah. You were. Oh well, I think you had been.
Okay. Well, my question is to go back a little bit to the UU side.
Sure.
I feel like I've been approached by several very well-meaning UU friends who have asked, are there questions or are there? I think there's a certain amount of anxiety about appropriating Buddhism.
Right.
And I wonder if in your experience, there have been ways that have been very successful or not, and if you would like to offer any sort of signposts for ways to do that.
Right. Appropriation's a real big deal in Unitarian Universalist circles, and it's our terminal kindness. We really want to be good, and I am not a big fan of the issue, particularly in the wake of being accused of appropriation for being a Buddhist. Yeah, and I think there is a seed of real, authentic issues that have to do with casually using and abusing others. Particularly, I think, in the case of cultures that can't defend themselves. This emerged actually out of Native American concerns with the appropriation of various rituals and symbols of Native American culture. But even that is complicated. I did a very cursory look at the origins of that. As near as I could tell, the people who actually raised the original concerns were highly politicized people who were equally criticizing their own spiritual leaders who were providing instruction to non-tribal members, and so it's always complicated. Often, I think it's a matter of aesthetics rather than ethics. There's stuff that's just so stupid. On the other hand, music happens because different forms of music bump into each other, and I think while we should be respectful, this is the matter of the heart. This can't be put in a box, and we can't make one person. If we were to follow this appropriations arguments to their logical conclusions, I would be painting my body blue and worshiping Wotan. And I have nothing against blue, and I'm sure Wotan is just a lovely deity, but not mine. So is that at all a useful part of the things? But aren't we great that we care? That does matter too.
Thank you, Professor. You have to excuse my ignorance, But what would be, in your opinion, the essence of Buddhism?
I'm sorry, can you go ahead and repeat?
The essence of Buddhism, in your opinion, what is
In my opinion, in my next part, can I defer that just a little bit, because I'm going to address a little bit my own personal journey, and I try to give a pocket definition. Is that okay? And then we can unpack that as we go forward. But it's a great segue when we're in maybe soon, maybe now.
I just, a lot of the stories that you talk about are about individuals who straddle both worlds.
Right.
I'm wondering if there are examples of communities that exist in both worlds.
Not so much yet, and I think that will be the next step. I saw one thing that has haunted me forever. I found a book about, a pre-World War II book about Buddhism in Japan. And there was this description of a Franciscan Buddhist order in Japan. And, you know, the book's gone. I have used the power of the Google machine, and I can't find any references to it whatsoever. And I'm just haunted by, what was that? You know, was that just some crazy guy, or was it something real that got destroyed in the war? We see small experiments going on, but it's hard to say. I would say in some ways my Zen community, Boundless Way, because of the four teachers in the network, currently 3 have significant Unitarian Universalist connections. We don't consider ourselves a Unitarian Universalist organization, but our approach to Zen Buddhism entails relentlessly flattening the hierarchy and looking at ways to empower people in a manner unusual in Zen communities. And it's pretty obvious where that comes from, since 3 of us have sat on boards for Unitarian congregations and have watched how one way of approaching flatter institutions is that, you know, I think that's going to be, if that doesn't happen, this is an experiment, and that it will go away. It needs, communities do need to find the commonality, and I don't know what they're going to look like precisely. Sometimes I thought the Buddhist churches of America should have been that, you know, and I'm kind of wondering, because people know the Buddhist churches of America, so it's a fascinating movement. It was Japanese immigrants to the United States belonging to one of the Jodo Shinshu sects, and I'm sorry, I can't remember which one, the big one, and they decided they needed to it was time to institutionally become Western. And they reincorporated themselves as the Buddhist churches of America. They had the first accredited seminary on a Western style, although they kind of look more, from where I look at it, they look more to the rabbinical model than to the Christian ministry model, in that they have a 4-year seminary program. 3 is academics, and 1 year is in the Holy Land, Japan in this case. And they didn't make the transition successfully at first, and they may have killed themselves, in that they wanted very much to preserve Japanese culture, and they wanted doctrinal purity. And there were lots of Westerners who were people of European descent. They're all Westerners now, most of the people there, but the people of European descent would become to it via Zen Buddhism, because that was the big thing that was happening in the 60s, 70s, and they were purged. They weren't pure enough in their Pure Land thinking, and they may have shrunk to the point where it's no longer, where now that they have moved past all that stuff, they may not be able to resurge, but a significant minority of their ministers, of their clergy, are now people of European descent, and there is a chance. It's really kind of exciting watching it from, benignly, hoping for them, for the best for them. On the other hand, you see this whole, for those of us who are concerned about parish life, there is this weird racial thing that happens. Typically in the typically in the BCA, they love having people of non-Japanese descent joining the congregations, right up to 20%. And then they start talking about people taking over. And people who study Christian Protestant churches, black churches love having white people come, right up to about 20%. And it's some kind of magic number, and I don't know what we're going to do about it. I mean, it's a cancer on the human heart, but it seems to be something we do, and how we struggle with that. The weirdness for me as a convert Buddhist is watching how is it that we fall into predominantly some ethnicity, European descent, Chinese descent, Japanese descent, and we can't seem to, in significant numbers, break out of that. And I hear ignorance, hatred, and grasping endlessly arise, and apparently it's true. Yeah. Is it? Yes.
Professor, may I ask a little bit of private question on you? So do you practice Zen?
I practice Zen.
Okay.
Yes.
So do you have some experience of Zen? Do you have some experience, special experience? Could you describe some?
So, are you? What is it that you would like to describe?
If you have some experience about Zen, when you do meditation or do research on it, so could you describe about it?
Sure, a little bit. One of the interesting things about Zen meditation as a discipline is that there's actually a small family of disciplines that are associated with the Chan Zen school, and we tend to practice we have two primary disciplines. One is called, in Japanese, shikantaza, mokosho-chan, if people really forgive my pronunciations of Chinese, the practice of silent illumination, and the other is kana-chan, or koan Zen. And the baseline is the shikantaza practice, just sitting. It is an interesting discipline. When you look at it, I think most all of us here, I'm kind of assuming we have some grounding in Vipassana, understanding of Vipassana practice and Shamatha disciplines, and Zen practice emerges out of bringing Shamatha and a little Vipassana and a little Shamatha together, stripping away the superstructure of body awareness and sensation awareness, and simply saying, sit down, shut up, pay attention. And so our practice is, our baseline practice within the Zen schools, whether we're koan people or pure sitting people, the baseline is sit down, shut up, pay attention. And when we do this, what we discover is lots of things. One is we don't shut up very much. You know, we're rehearsing the past, we're looking to the future. Our literature is rife with Kensho experiences, you know, with Satori experiences, with these moments of awakening. And they're great, and they have their place. It is good to, you know, be hit in the head with a 2x4 and see the world a little differently. The day in, day out of sitting is an ordinary human being sitting down, being an ordinary human being. So if I'm particularly tired and exhausted, I'm going to have tired, exhausted zazen. If I'm rested and on my game, there's not a lot of noise. I'm sort of sitting there, and then I'm, look at that, I'm pretty clear. And then of course there's the whole race of the mind from there. You know, oh, I shouldn't have done that. You know, and for us, what's human? What arises in the moment? What is it? And just being nakedly present to it, nakedly present to it, nakedly present to it. And so we don't have stages. We don't have steps to our practice. The beginner's mind and the expert's mind, you know, the same mind. Is that a little bit, tiny bit of help?
I'm curious, so I'm studying to be a UU minister, and I'm curious how you as a Zen Buddhist, how that affects your sort of practice as a UU minister and like a congregation.
Sure.
Both from sort of philosophical, but also like from the everyday practice.
Well, in the everyday practice part, it's been one of those things that on the one hand is what has kind of makes me interesting. You know, people say, oh, look, he's a Zen person. On the other hand, if people are unhappy with me, oh, conflict of interest. Yeah. As I have, I'm 65. You know, I've been doing this for 25 years. At this point in my life, WYSIWYG, you know, what you see is what you get, and I think I have competences. I have enough competences that people are happy with who I am. I don't actually, through most of my profession, my ministerial career, one of the ironies would have been that you would get fewer sermons that touched on explicitly Buddhist themes from me than from some other generic Unitarian minister. Now I'm probably right in the average. You know, I mean, part of the thing for me is that I learned how to read out of the King James Bible. You know, sitting next to my grandmother, and she had the big picture book. You know, and it turns out Jesus is blonde. I don't know what people are talking about. It was right there in the family Bible. I mean, my natural metaphors arise out of the fact that that's in my blood. The only thing that's shifted is that I'm a koan practitioner. And the koan literature now that I've practiced for 30 plus years has begun to be as intimately part of who I am. And so there are casts of language, there are phrasing, there are references that draw out of the Chinese koan literature, which is kind of interesting because people sometimes think that those are my casts of language because they kind of have heard the King James stuff, but they rarely have heard the Chow Chow's dog or something, and it's just who I am. It's just if I'm look, it's just sort of like whatever. Is that sure? Where are we in our time?
3:08.
Is that a bad thing or a good thing? We got. Okay, yeah. Would you like to hear my little personal confessional thing, and then maybe see where that goes? So, I'm a blogger, and I went back and looked recently. In 2008, I had a sabbatical, and somebody said, "Oh, James, blog," because then people in the congregation will feel kept in touch with, and they won't be too resentful that you're being paid to do nothing. And I started it. I just took to it like a duck to water. I'm living evidence that any idiot who can string words together can blog. I like to gather miscellaneous things, some of them of use, sometimes of no use. Maybe twice a week I'm inspired to think about something. And here's something I thunked of recently. I started with a quote from Robert Aitken, who is my teacher's teacher, and one of these truly lovely personalities. I don't, if you're not familiar with, he was one of the first people of European descent to be acknowledged as a Zen teacher. He lived and taught in Hawaii for all of his life. And in one of his last books, Encouraging Words, he wrote, "Unpack karma and you get cause and effect. Unpack cause and effect and you get affinity. Unpack affinity and you get the tendency to coalesce. Unpack the tendency to coalesce and you get intimacy. Unpack intimacy and you will find that you contain all beings. Unpack containment and there is the goddess of mercy herself." So, in my youth, I prayed to know God. I prayed with complete earnestness, with the fullness perhaps only a teenager can muster, with a deal. Show me your face, and then you can kill me. I meant it. And I was met with silence. Many years have passed. Today, by most conventions, I'm an atheist. That is, I do not believe in a human-like consciousness that directs things. After I wrote that, I wrote a whole bunch of things, and because I want to be PG, and I don't really want to invite insulting people too or inordinately, I cut it, left it there. In a universe of uncertainty, I come as close as a human mind can to certainty that there is no deity that acts within history. And within my experience, there is something, the best word I can call is love. I suspect I know the grubby roots of that love, how it arises within my mammalian consciousness. But it seems to have a larger existence as well. I found how the Unitarian Universalist two truths, that the individual is precious and that the individual is created out of a world of mutuality, results in an experience of love. And then the pocket definition for the Dharma. I have found in Zen Buddhism two truths: that everything and everybody in the universe is mutually created through a dance of causality, and that everything and everybody in the universe has no substance, but rather is wildly open, boundless. And seeing this results in an experience of love. Of course, this love is completely amoral. It is desire, and it can extend beyond desire. And it is here, I think, we find our work as human beings. How my life is directed out of this experience, and how a range of behaviors as ideals and as pointers and as warnings emerge. The 5 lay precepts of Buddhism are perhaps the clearest of the many intuitions of a path of intimacy, this path of love. What I find in this world of hurt and loss is something precious and powerful, terrible and beautiful. Out of the silence, I have indeed found something. As a word, love falls short. It has to do too much work, standing for sentimentality and the burning away of self and other, and so much in between. Languages like that fall short. And points to that place where planets and stars and whole galaxies burst into existence, burn bright, and die. And in some random corners of this dance of galaxies, heart minds birth that can see, can feel, can know this love. If we want a meaning in a world that exists beyond meaning and meaninglessness, I suspect this encounter with the face of the divine is it. A path to walk, a sea in which to swim, our true home, one soul, love. Want to talk about it?
What is love?
I'm sorry.
What is love?
What is love? Well, and this is, it's a difficult thing because it can stand for the grossest sentimentality, and it can mean this experience of the burning away of self and other. And it has something to do with intimacy, you know. The Robert Aitken quote, where we keep, you know, we follow his variation on the chain of existence, but at the center of it is this goddess that's love. And in my experience, it's totally a human thing, but it's totally a human thing, you know, and we have the possibility of encountering it. Another way into it, when we talk about awakening in Zen, as one of my students said at one point, one of the wise ones, I sort of hate, and I get credit for him. I mean, this is the cool thing. He said, "Well, what, you know, I don't know. I don't understand. Awakening to what is, why should that be anything in particular? I mean, it could be dead. It could feel cold. It could feel, but the experience, pretty much the universal experience in one angle or another, is intimacy, is love, is compassion. You can do a whole unpacking because Buddhists tend to prefer the word compassion. Christian culture, Western Jews and Christians tend to prefer love. Facets of the same mystery that is the joy of our lives, you know, the good thing, the possibility of something that is not sad, you know, and it's a goad because it's this remembrance that we belong to each other. So not only is there a personal healing that can happen out of this, but we're pushed to act in the world as well. We're pushed to, because we're connected, you know, it's one family, and we strive to try and find ways to alleviate suffering of others as well. For me, this is the constellation of love. And I don't even exclude cheap sentimentality, you know, that's part of it too, you know. Although it's dangerous. I mean, and this is dangerous. I mean, I saw an etymological dictionary once, and I can't find this anyplace else, so it's probably not true, but I like to cite it. It said the hypothetical Indo-European word for love is lub, and it means desire. And for Buddhists, that's an interesting term to find at the center of things. And I think the great practice, particularly for me and for others, is this discovery. When we see that everything is in this constant play and arising, and we see that how we grasp at things causes hurt and suffering, often we think the solution is to not touch anything, is to remove ourselves, to disengage. But that seems to be the mistake. The path appears to be fully engaged, but with open hands, with fully engaged knowing it will end. Nothing is permanent. And fully engaged, prepared to let it go. Love.
Does this interconnectedness and love involve other beings, the creatures around us?
The whole shebang. Kind of rough, huh?
Because it seems to be only human to human, but what about the rest of creation that we're
the whole shebang.
Destroying so happily?
Well, we destroy each other too. I mean, you know, we're in constant grasping and aversion, and endless variations, uncertainties constantly arise. It's the shadow of the human heart, and we, you know, we need to work on it. You know, they can change. They in a heartbeat. You know, grasping is generosity. You know, anger is clarity. Certainty becomes the great not knowing. You know, the constant curiosity, the openness to the world being something utterly more mysterious and powerful than we can ever think it is. I think, I find, I discover.